Welcome back, everyone. As many of you who have been buying a camera might know that the process of finding the right kind of camera for you might be a tricky task. In my case, I are now on my third camera. I decided that I'm gonna swap out my RX100 for most of my YouTube videos that I'm doing, mainly because I'm not fully satisfied with the noise output from that camera. In every other sense of that camera, I'm completely in love with it. I love the size. I love the eye tracking autofocus. It's always spot on. It's never failed me, and it's a kick-ass camera. But when you're filming in the S-Logs profiles on that camera, it generates a lot of noise. You could, of course, use certain denoising processes and get rid of the noise. That works pretty good, actually. But now when I decided that I'm gonna have this set up here around me, I kind of felt that the RX100 is just not enough for this purpose. Not that it wouldn't work, but when I'm looking on the image that it generates, I kind of feel like I want to get out more of the image than what the RX100 can generate. One of those things are the background. I want the background to be a little bit blurry and not take too much focus. That is in some ways possible to do with the RX100, but in order to do that, you need to move further back and zoom in. And I don't have that kind of distance in here, so I need to rely on a larger sensor and a wider aperture. The process of finding the perfect camera for this purpose, but also for some other purposes, like when I'm out on the field and shooting my films, mainly for YouTube, I want the camera to work for a lot of purposes. The first camera I looked on was a Canon XC10. It is a camera that totally went under the radar for me, but on the paper it looks really good. It has 4K, it films with, it has face tracking autofocus, which is important for me, and it shoots in 4:2:2 8-bit color. It's a little bit better than what most of the other cameras are shooting in, which is 4:2:0. It gives some better range in the colors for adjusting the image in post-processing and in the color grading, which is one of the things I want to do. It also have a high bit rate when it shoots. It goes up to 200 or 300 megabit per second. So on paper, all is fine. Unfortunately, that camera don't have a removable lens, which isn't the worst thing ever, because the zoom from that one goes from 18 to 240. So it's a wide zoom range. It has in-body camera stabilization, which works really well. But that camera didn't blur out the background as I wanted it to do. And so I was like, but I was willing to compromise a little bit. But then the other things with that camera is, if you want to shoot in 4K on that camera, you need to use CFOS 2 cards, or you need to shoot to an external recorder. So then the question pops out, do I want to spend a couple of thousands on buying CFOS 2 cards, because they are quite expensive? And by a couple of thousand, I'm referring to Swedish crowns, which is equal to a couple of $100. Yeah, not really. And then you have the recorder option, which would be a Atomos Ninja 5, which then, of course, it adds more on the price, but it also unlocks some of the features. I think it unlocks 10-bit recording, so maybe, but then we still had an issue with the background blur. So I got a heck of a good deal on a A6400, a Sony A6400. I came over this with a lens for only $800 US. That is a ridiculously good deal. So far so good. I was starting to feel like, okay, this is a nice camera. It has good autofocus. The image quality is good of it. And it shoots in S-Log. I could, if I want, I could pair it up with my RX100 that I'm still gonna use a lot on this channel, especially for the B shot, where I just gonna like shoot like down here like a second camera. And then I took this camera out and was shooting on location, and well, this one doesn't have in-body camera stabilization, which is kind of okay. There is optical steady shots on it, on some of them, which is working very well, though I want to be able to use some vintage lenses. I recently picked up a bunch of lenses that I want to use with this camera, and some of those lenses that I picked up is 50mm from Nikon. I have an old Pentax 35 and I have a Pentax 28, and on the camera that is running at the moment I have a pretty fast Pentax 50mm that has an f-stop on 1.7. But my hidden gem in this collection, and there's some more vintage lenses on the way to me, but two of my hidden gems is the lens that I have on this setup. This is my new setup, by the way, but this lens I have here is a Helios 44. This is the second version, so Helios 44-2, and there's a Helios 44 4M. I think it's called 4M, but the one of the Helios 44-4, at least, something like that, on the way as well. These lenses are very well known because they are giving the swirly bokeh, but they are also very sharp in the middle, and it gives they give very nice colors. But when shooting with this kind of camera and I'm putting on a vintage lens, it gets a little bit shaky. The image stabilization in this camera is not the best one. There's definitely better ones, but it actually takes away that little edge of it. I was looking around a little bit on other manufacturers and stuff like that, but I ended up with Sony. It's not the best cameras on specifications, but the autofocus in Sony is one of the best, especially when it comes to face tracking. Then you need to add in some other stuffs as well. One thing is that the sensor doesn't crop when you're filming in 4K, which many other cameras does. And this camera is also downsampling from a 6K down to 4K, so you get a very sharp image from it. Another camera that I was actually looking on is the Nikon Z6. That camera is a little bit old, but on paper it looks really good. But buying a Nikon Z6 didn't made any sense for me because I already invested in some Sony stuffs, and I'm pretty familiar with the Sony, and my RX100 is a Sony. So I wanted a camera where the workflow will be similar, and a camera that would easily be matched, or like two cameras that would be matched with each other. So, as mentioned in my previous video, I kind of said like, okay, I'm probably gonna end up buying the 6600, and well, here it is. It's a Sony 6600 with the image stabilization. And if you are considering to buying either Sony 6400 or 6600, I would definitely say go for the 6600. It costs more, definitely, but in my opinion, the things you get when you're getting to the 6600 that stands out from the 6400 is that image stabilization, which takes away the edge. You're also getting a bigger grip, so it kind of feels a little bit better in the hand, especially if you have big hands. For me, that is not really something that I care that much about, but the good thing with the bigger grip is that they put a bigger battery in it. So the battery time in the 6600 is much better than the 6400. The 6400, however, is not that terrible. There's also another thing, which is when you're shooting with the 6400 in S-Log2, the autofocus is not that great. In hybrid log gamma, it works superbly, but they fixed that issue in the 6600. So it is on paper a much better camera. However, it's not full frame. The next step above this camera is the A7C. That camera is a little bit controversial. Some people say, well, it's just an A3, Sony A3S or A3, or Sony A3 something. It's on the specifications in that camera is just similar as an older camera. So is it really worth it? In my opinion, yes, it is. The form factor especially, C stands for compact, and that's really nice. If you, however, expected more from the A7C, I could understand that that camera might be something that you're thinking that it's not really what you wanted. However, full frame is always always nicer. That's, of course, it's a personal preference. But for me, one of my favorite lenses and the focal length on favorite lenses is the 50 millimeters. I'm sold on 50 millimeters. If I don't, I would be happy if I could only shoot with 50 millimeters forever, kind of. Maybe not really, but kind of. And you might say, but hey, you could just put a 35 millimeter on this one and you get the same. But no, you don't. You might get the same area, you might get the same field of view, but finding a cool 50 millimeter lens is easier than finding a 35 millimeter, especially if you're gonna go like old school and stuff like that. Today you could like go out and buy a really nice 35 millimeters that is like having an f-stop of 1.2, 1.4, stuff like that. But you will never find a Helios 44 with the characteristic look and the character that one have. And that's why I love the 50 millimeters. There are so many 50 millimeters lenses and they have that special character. And that character is just right on the full frame. So there's one question remaining in my hunt for the perfect camera. Should I go for the A7C, which compared to this one is like $1,300 for the house only, and the A7C is roughly about $2,000, give or take, and depending on what country you live in. But the difference is quite noticeable, and then you need lenses as well. I have some autofocus lenses that work with APS-C, but I don't have any full frame lenses, and full frame lenses are generally more expensive. However, you might, in my case, I may be going with the A7C, focus manually, working manually, might be the way to go. That's what I'm normally doing when I'm working with my professional cameras on my work. In most cases, that is the Blackmagic Cinema Pocket, which is also the camera that I'm recording with at the moment with that 50 millimeters vintage lens. So it's going to be really excited to see how that look. However, my rig is not the final in a way. I got the monitor here. It's a cheap one. It's from Newer. And the rig is a Akmtb. It's basically the same rig that I had on the A6400. The only difference is the camera. And then I borrowed an old shoulder mount from my work just to see how it will feel if you're like gonna handhold it. And I also borrowed an old handle that is like stuff that lays around, and I thought it would be a good idea to just like put them there and see how it feels before I decide if that's something that I'm gonna invest in, if it feels good. And at the moment I'm kind of like starting to get somewhere. I have some issues to reach the focus ring, so I'm kind of considering putting some sort of follow focus on it. There is a negative thing with these vintage lenses, however, which is that they are quite compact. So putting a follow focus could be a little bit difficult, especially if you're not running with adapter. Luckily, most of the vintage lenses requires an adapter which moves it out a little bit, and that makes it easier to put the follow focus. Another thing is that in some cases, the focus rings are not the best ones, so you might need to put some extra gears on it. And another thing is that the focus pull is quite wide. This Helios goes from probably around like 320 degrees on the focus. So if you're using a follow focus, you need to turn it a lot, or put a bigger gear on it. We will see where it ends up. I'm starting to feel that this is a way I would be able to work. Maybe I should have a handle like over here in the front instead. And it depends on how you want to hold it and how I'm going to focus it. But I'm definitely on to something. Coming up on the channel soon is some light reviews. I have I'm not sure if it's so visible, but maybe you could see some red tones around me because I bought a cheap RGB light, which is almost, it looks like a lightsaber, and it could kind of, you could swing it around like a lightsaber. Pretty cool stuff. And I also bought a super small LED panel, which is roughly about this side. And that LED panel is side lit, so it has that soft light. It's very similar to my Godox. It's like a Godox miniature, but it's not a Godox. And the price for that LED panel is between $30 and $60. And it comes without, and it's just for the light. There's no AC power or anything. However, you could connect it to AC power and you could run batteries. If you want to guess what kind of light that is, give you a guess in the comments below. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more camera related stuffs, click here to see a playlist with more camera stuffs, and click here to subscribe. Also, if you don't like this kind of content, let me know that in the comment below. However, if you don't like it, don't worry too much. We are soon back with cars. 1 month from now, or less than 1 month, the first off-road driving of this season will take ahead, and my goal is to be set with the camera until then and make an epic movie about that. So once more, since I've been talking quite a lot now, click here to see the playlist with camera related stuff, and click here to subscribe. Also click that bell icons so you don't miss out my weekly content, and give this video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I see you later.